Seeker after knowledge. I fear that you will not reach Mecca, O nomad, for the road which you are following leads to Turkestan. Sheikh Sadi, Rose Garden, on the manners of dervishes. I was sitting one day in the circle of a Sufi teacher in northern India when a young foreigner was brought in. He kissed the hand of the sheikh and started to talk. For 3.5 years, he said, he had studied religions, mysticism, and occultism from books in Germany, France, and Britain. He had moved from one society to another, looking for something which would lead him to the right path. Formal religion did not appeal to him. Collecting all the money he could lay his hands on, he journeyed to the east, and he had wandered from Alexandria to Cairo, from Damascus to Tehran, through Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan. He had been in Burma and Ceylon, as well as in Malaya. In all of these places he had talked to and taken copious notes from spiritual and religious teachers. There was no doubt that he had covered an immense amount of ground, physically and otherwise. He wanted to join this sheikh because he wanted to do something practical, to concentrate upon ideas, to improve himself. And he showed every sign of being more than ready to submit himself to the discipline of a dervish order. The sheikh asked him why he had rejected all the other teachings. There were various reasons, he said, different in almost every case. "Tell me some," said the teacher. The great religions, he said, did not seem to go deep enough. They concentrated upon dogmas. Dogmas had to be accepted before anything else. Zen, as he had met it in the West, was out of touch with reality. Yoga required a fierce discipline if it were not to be just a fad. The cults which centered around the personality of one man were based upon concentration upon that man. He could not accept the principle that ceremony, symbolism, and what he called mimicry of spiritual truths had any true reality. Among such Sufis as he had been able to contact, a similar pattern seemed to him to obtain. Some had wholehearted discipleship. Some used rhythmic movements which seemed like mimicry of something to him. Others taught through recitals indistinguishable from sermons. Some Sufis were wedded to concentration upon theological themes. Would the sheikh help him? "More than you know," said the sheikh. "Man is developing, whether he knows it or not. Life is one, though in some forms it appears inert. While you live, you are learning. Those who learn through deliberate effort to learn are cutting down on the learning which is being projected upon them in the normal state. Uncultivated men often have wisdom to some degree because they allow the access of the impacts of life itself. When you walk down the street and look at things or people, these impressions are teaching you. If you try actively to learn from them, you learn certain things, but they are predetermined things. You look at a man's face. As you look at it, questions arise in your mind, and they are answered by your own mind. Is he dark? Is he fair? What sort of a man is he? There is also a constant interchange between the other person and yourself. This interchange is dominated by your subjectivity. By that I mean you are seeing what you want to see. This has become an automatic action. You are like a machine, but also a man, only superficially trained. You look at a house. The general and particular characteristics of that house are split up into smaller elements and assessed in your brain. But not objectively, only in accordance with your past experiences. These experiences in modern man include what he has been told. Thus the house will be big or small, nice or not so nice, like your own or not like it. In greater detail, it will have a roof like another. It will have windows which are unusual. The machine is going around in circles because it is merely adding to its formal knowledge. The newcomer looked dazed. "What I am trying to convey," said the sheikh relentlessly, "is that you assess things in accordance with preconceived ideas. This is almost inevitable for the intellectual man. You do not like symbolism in religion, you have decided. Very well. You will seek a religion without symbolism." He paused. "Is that what you mean?" "I think I mean that the use of symbolism by various bodies does not satisfy me as being genuine or necessary," said the youth. "Does that mean that you would know if you found a form of using symbols which was correct?" queried the teacher. "Symbolism and ritual to me are not fundamental," replied the would-be disciple, "and it is fundamentals that I seek." "Would you recognize a fundamental if you saw one?" "I think so." "Then the things which we say and do would seem to you to be mere matters of opinion, or tradition, or superficiality, because we do use symbols. Others use chants, and movements, and thinking and silence, concentration and contemplation, a dozen other things." The sheikh paused. The visitor spoke. "Do you think the exclusivity of Judaism, the rituals of Christianity, the fasting in Islam, the Buddhist shaven head to be fundamentals?" Our guest was now warming up to a characteristic intellectual theme. "The Sufi dictum is that the apparent is the bridge to the real," said the sheikh. "This means, in the case which we are considering, that all these things have a meaning. The meaning may be lost, the performance a mere mockery, a sentimental or misunderstood acting of a part. But properly used, they are connected in a continuous sense with the true reality. So originally all ritual is meaningful and has a necessary effect. Essentially all ritual, symbolism and so on is a reflection of a truth. It may have been concocted, adapted, diverted to other ends, but it represents a truth, the inner truth of what we call the Sufi way. But the practitioners do not know what it means. They may know in one sense, on one level, a level sufficiently deep to propagate the system. But as far as reaching reality and self-development, the use of these techniques is nil. "Then," said the student, "how do we know who is using the outward signs in the right way, the way of development, and who is not? I can accept that these superficial indications are of potential value, inasmuch as they could lead to something else, and we have to start somewhere. But I, for one, could not tell you which system I should follow." "A moment ago you were applying for admission to our circle," said the sheikh, "and now I have succeeded in confusing you to such an extent that you admit you cannot judge. Well, that is the essence of it. You cannot judge. You cannot use the instruments of carpentry for watchmaking. You have set yourself a task to find spiritual truth. You have sought this truth in the wrong directions and interpreted its manifestations in the wrong way. Is it surprising that you will remain in this state? There is one other alternative for you, as you are at present. The excessive concentration upon the theme, the anxiety and emotion which is engendered in you, will ultimately pile up to such an extent that you will seek a relief from it. Then what will happen? Emotion will swamp intellect, and you will either hate religion or, more likely, become converted to some cult which takes the responsibility. You will settle down with the notion that you have found what you sought. Is there no other alternative, even assuming that I accept your belief that my emotion can swamp my intellect? The intellectual training does not take kindly to any suggestion that it is not comprehensive, nor that it can be swamped by emotion. The slight asperity in tone showed that the thinker was asserting himself. This was not lost on the sheikh. The alternative, which you will not take, is detachment. You see, when we detach, we do not do so in the way in which you do. Intellect teaches you to detach your mind from something and view it intellectually. What we have to do is to detach from both intellect and emotion. How can you become accessible to anything if you are using intellect to judge it? Your problem is that what you call intellect is really a series of ideas which alternately take possession of your consciousness. We do not regard intellect as sufficient. Intellect, for us, is a complex of more or less compatible attitudes which you have been trained to regard as one single thing. According to Sufi thinking, there is a level below this, which is a single, small, but vital one. It is the true intellect. This true intellect is the organ of comprehension, existing in every human being. From time to time in ordinary human life it breaks through, producing strange phenomena which cannot be accounted for by the usual methods. Sometimes these are called occult phenomena, sometimes they are thought to be a transcending of the time or space relationship. This is the element in the human being which is responsible for his evolution to a higher form. And I have to take this on trust? No, you cannot take it on trust, even if you wanted to do so. If you took it on trust, you would soon abandon it. Even if you were intellectually convinced that it was necessary as a hypothesis, you might very well lose it. No, you have to experience it. This means, of course, that you have to feel it in a way which you feel nothing else. It comes into your consciousness as a truth, different in quality from other things which you have been accustomed to regarding as truths. By its very difference, you recognize that it belongs to the area which we call the other. Our visitor found this difficult to digest and returned to his established way of thinking. Are you trying to produce in me a conviction that there is something deeper and that I feel it? Because if not, I do not see the point of spending so much time on this discussion. You will think it very rude of me, I am sure, said the sheikh amiably. But I have to say that things are not as you see them. You see, you come here and talk. I talk to you. As a consequence of our talk and thought, many things happen. As far as you are concerned, all that has happened is that we have talked. You may feel that you are convinced, or you are not. To us, the meaning of the whole event is far greater. Something is happening as a result of this talk. It is happening, as you can well imagine, in the minds of all the people here. But something else is also happening, to you, to me, and elsewhere. Something which you understand when you understand it. Take it on the very simple level of cause and effect as normally understood. A man goes into a shop and buys a piece of soap. As a result of this purchase, many things can happen. The shopkeeper has that much more money, more soap may be ordered, and so on. Words spoken in the course of the transaction have an effect, depending upon the condition of mind of the two parties. When the man leaves the shop, there is an additional factor in his life that was not there before, the soap. Many things can happen as a result of this, but to the two main characters, all that has really happened is that a piece of soap has been bought and paid for. They have no awareness of the ramifications of this, and little interest in it. It is only when something noteworthy, from their point of view, happens that they think about it again. Then they will say, "Fancy that! The man who bought my soap was a murderer. Or perhaps he was a king. Or perhaps he left a counterfeit coin." Every action, like every word, has an effect and a place. This is the basis of the Sufi system without a system. And as you will have read in innumerable stories, the Sufi moves among the incredible complex of actions and happenings in a state of inner awareness of their meaning. "I can see what you mean," said the visitor, "but I cannot experience it. If it is true, of course it accounts for quite a number of things. Some occult happenings, prophetic experiences, the failure of all but a very few people to solve riddles of life by merely thinking about them. And it could also mean that a person who is aware of the complex developments all around him can harmonize himself with them to a degree impossible to others. But the price of trying this is the price of throwing away one's previous knowledge. I could not do that." The sheikh did not want a verbal victory, and did not close in for a coup de grace. "My friend, a man once hurt his leg. He had to walk with a crutch. This crutch was very useful to him, both for walking and for many other purposes. He taught all his family to use crutches, and they became a part of normal life. It was part of everyone's ambition to have a crutch. Some were made of ivory, others adorned with gold. Schools were opened to train people in their use, university chairs endowed to deal with the higher aspects of this science. A very few people started to walk without crutches. This was considered scandalous, absurd. Besides, there were so many uses for crutches. Some of them replied and were punished. They tried to show that a crutch could be used sometimes when needed, or that many of the uses to which a crutch was put could be supplied in other ways. Few listened. In order to overcome the prejudices, some of the people who could walk without support began to behave in a way totally different from established society. Still, they remained a few. When it was found that, having used crutches for so many generations, few people could in fact walk without crutches, the majority proved that they were necessary. "Here," they said, "here is a man. Try to make him walk without a crutch. See, he cannot." "But we are walking without crutches," the ordinary walkers reminded them. "This is not true, merely a fancy of your own," said the cripples, because by that time they were becoming blind as well. Blind because they would not see. "The analogy does not fit completely," said the young man. "Does any analogy fit completely?" asked the sheikh. "Don't you see that if I could explain everything easily and completely by means of a single story, there would be no need for this talk? Only partial truths are expressed exactly by analogy. For instance, I can give you a perfect pattern for a circular disc, and you can cut out thousands from it. Each one may be a duplicate of each other one. But as we all know, a circle is only relatively circular. Increase its dimensions proportionately by several hundred times, and you will find that it is not a true circle anymore. This is a fact of physical science. I know that all scientific laws are only relatively true. This is all that science itself claims. And yet you seek complete truth through relative methods. Yes, And so do you, because you said that symbols and so on are bridges to the real, though they are incomplete. The difference is that you have chosen one single method of approaching truth. This is not enough. We use many different methods, and we recognize that there is a truth which is perceived by an inner organ. You are trying to boil water, and you do not know how. We boil water by bringing together certain elements: the fire, the container, the water. But what about my intellect? That must fall into its right perspective, find its own level, when the present lack of balance of the personality is restored. When the visitor had left, someone asked the sage, "Will you comment upon this interview?" "If I comment upon it," he said, "it would lose its perfection." We had all learned, each in accordance with his status. The Sufi doctrine of equipoise between extremes has several meanings. Where it applies to discipleship, the capacity to learn from another, it means that the individual must be free from incorrect thinking before he can start to learn. Our Western would-be disciple has to learn that he cannot bring his assumptions about his own capacity to learn into a field where he does not, in fact, know what it is that he is trying to learn. All that he really knows is that he is in some way dissatisfied. All the rest is his own collection of ideas as to what the reason for the dissatisfaction might be, and an attempt to find a cure for the illness which he has diagnosed without first asking himself about his diagnostic abilities. We have chosen an actual incident involving a Westerner, but this form of thinking is not confined to the West. Similarly, the opposite extreme, the man who wants to submit himself completely to the will of a master, which is said to be characteristic of the Eastern mind, is next to useless. The seeker must first attain some measure of balance between these two extremes before he can be said to have the capacity to learn. Both types learn about their capacity to learn mainly from the observation of the Sufi teacher and his way of behaving. As the human exemplar, his doings and sayings are the bridge between the relative incapacity of the student and the position of being a Sufi. Less than 1 person in 100 will normally have any conception of either of these two requirements. If the student, by careful study of Sufi literature, does glimpse the principle upon which discipleship works, he will be more than fortunate. He can find it in Sufic material, providing that he is prepared to read and reread it, to school himself to avoid the automatic associations which pigeonhole or label Sufi and all other thought for him. Generally speaking, he is more likely to be temporarily attracted to some more plausible school, which lays down inflexible principles which he can lean upon.